Well, hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to Story Time with Mr. S. We have been reading Stuart Little. So far, we read Chapter 1. There was a lot of stuff going on in Chapter 1. First of all, we found out that Stuart is a mouse that has human parents and a human brother. He lives in New York City, and he went into a bathtub drain to rescue his mother's ring. That's what's happened in Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is short. It's only a couple of pages, so it's going to be a short one today. Once again, this was Stuart Little. It was written by E.B. White, and this book was written a very long time ago, which is why some of the words sound a little funny in it, so we'll do the best we can with it. All right, chapter number 2 is called Home Problems. Stuart was also helpful when it came to ping pong. The Littles played ping pong, but the balls had a way of rolling under chairs, sofas, and radiators, and this meant the players were forever stooping down and reaching under things. Stuart soon learned to chase balls, and it was a great sight to see him come out from under the hot radiator, pushing the ping pong ball with all his might, and sweat rolling down his cheeks. The ball, of course, was almost as high as he was, and he had to throw his whole weight against it in order to keep it rolling. The Littles had a grand piano in their living room, which was all right, except one of the keys was a sticky key and didn't work properly. Mrs. Little said she thought it must be the damp weather, but I don't see how it could be the damp weather, for the key had been sticking for about 4 years, during which time there had been many bright, clear days. But anyway, the key stuck, which was a great inconvenience to anyone trying to play the piano. It bothered George particularly when he was playing the scarf dance, which is rather lively. It was George who had the idea of stationing Stuart inside the piano to push the key up the second it was played. This was not an easy job for Stuart, as he had to crouch down between the felt hammers so that he wouldn't get hit on the head. But Stuart liked it just the same. It was exciting inside the piano, dodging about, and the noise was quite terrific. Sometimes, after a long session, he would emerge quite deaf, as though he had just stepped out of an airplane after a long journey, and it would be some time before he really felt normal again. Mr. and Mrs. Little often discussed Stuart quietly between themselves when he wasn't around, for they had never quite recovered from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. He was so very tiny, and he presented so many problems to his parents. Mr. Little said that, for one thing, there must be no references to mice in their conversation. He made Mrs. Little tear from the nursery songbook the page about the three blind mice. See how they run. I don't want Stuart to get a lot of notions in his head, said Mr. Little. I should feel badly to have my son growing up fearing that a farmer's wife was going to cut off his tail with a carving knife. It is such things that make children dream bad dreams when they go to bed at night. Yes, replied Mrs. Little, and I think we had better start thinking about the poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. I think it might embarrass Stuart to hear mice mentioned in such a belittling manner." "That's right," said her husband. "But what shall we say when we come to that line in the poem? We'll have to say something. We can't just say 'twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring.' That doesn't sound complete. It needs a word to rhyme with house." What about louse?" said Mrs. Little. "Or grouse," said Mr. Little. "I suggest souse," remarked George, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room. It was decided that louse was the best substitute for mouse. So when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little carefully rubbed out the word mouse from the poem and wrote in the word louse, and Stuart always thought that the poem went this way. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse." The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. This hole had been made by some mice in the days before the Littles came to live in the house, and nothing had been done about stopping it up. Mr. Little was not at all sure that he understood Stuart's real feelings about the mouse hole. He didn't know where the hole led to, and that made him uneasy to think Stuart might someday feel the desire to venture in. After all, he does look a good deal like a mouse, said Mr. Little to his wife. I've never seen a mouse yet that didn't like to go into a hole. And that is the end of the chapter, Problems at Home. And in this chapter, boys and girls, we can see that it's very tough for Mr. and Mrs. Little to have a mouse for a son, because they have to make sure they're not hurting his feelings and that they're not letting him get into any kind of danger. That was a nice and short chapter, but we learned a few more things about the Littles and where they live. We learned that they like to play ping pong. Have you ever played ping pong, boys and girls? Sometimes I've played ping pong before, but I don't really like to play it for the same reasons that the Littles have trouble. I'm always chasing those balls around, and they're always going underneath chairs and tables and things. We also found out that the Littles have a grand piano in their living room. Do you know what a grand piano is? It's a piano that's really, really, really big. It's a piano like Mrs. Hall plays in music class, but instead of being kind of narrow, it's very long. It has a big top that lifts up, and apparently there's the key sticks. So George, the brother, sent Stuart in to unstick the key. So again, that was a short chapter, but it was a good chapter because it gave us a little bit more information about the life of Stuart Little. What do you think it would be like being a mouse and living with humans? Why don't you tell me your thoughts on my Google Classroom page, and don't forget to click the turned in button after you've seen this so that I know you've seen it. And tomorrow we will read chapter 3. Let me see, what is chapter 3 called here? Chapter 3 is called Washing Up. Washing up. I wonder what it can be about. Well, we're going to find out tomorrow, boys and girls. So have a good night. Everybody stay safe. Keep washing your hands, and I will see you guys tomorrow.